All right, let's dive in today, folks. We're taking a closer look at change data capture, or CDC. All because of this kind of dramatic dataengineer.io newsletter, change data capture, CDC, is taking over the world. I mean, really, taking over the world.
Yeah, a bit of a bold claim, but there's definitely a lot of excitement around CDC right now. The article is really pushing this idea that CDC is the future, that it's going to replace those daily snapshots we're used to.
And I guess, they're saying we could have a record of literally every single change as it happens.
Exactly. Imagine knowing precisely what a value was at any moment. It's like having a complete history of your data, every edit, every update, all perfectly tracked.
Okay, that's powerful stuff. But before we get too carried away, let's back up a bit. What exactly IS change data capture for, the folks who might be tuning in for the first time?
Think of it like this. Imagine you've got this database table, right? Full of customer info. And let's say someone decides to update their address. Well, CDC captures that change. It's not just about the new address, it's about the old one too, and when exactly that switch happened. So you see the whole evolution of that data point.
So it's not just a snapshot. It's more like a continuous, like a film reel of how your data changes over time.
You got it. And having that film reel is incredibly useful, especially for folks like analysts and data scientists. Think about it. You can reconstruct the state of your data at any point in time. For things like customer behavior tracking or trend analysis, that level of detail is priceless.
Okay, so lots to unpack there.
Mhm.
Now, the newsletter dives into 3 different ways to actually put CDC into practice. The first one they're kind of jazzed about is doing it directly within your production database, specifically using database triggers in Postgres.
Yeah, they seem pretty keen on that method. They argue it's simple to implement and captures everything you need, especially with how Postgres handles triggers. Essentially, you set it up so that any change to a table kicks off a function, and that function logs the change data into a separate table, kind of like a change journal.
So like an extra layer of logging happening behind the scenes. But the article does mention potential performance hits with this approach, right? Constantly writing to this extra table, doesn't that bog things down?
It's a valid concern. It's a trade-off. You get complete data capture, but there's a performance overhead for sure. The more changes you have, the harder your database has to work. The article suggests things like using analytical replicas to take some of that load off.
Okay, makes sense. Moving on, the second method they highlight is capturing API requests. Now, I gotta be honest, I'm struggling to wrap my head around how API calls fit into the CDC picture. Can you break that down for me?
Sure thing. Imagine you have a REST API that handles user profile updates, right? Every time someone updates their profile through the API, you can intercept that request and log those changes to something like Kafka. So you're essentially catching the changes at the API level before they even get to your database.
So you're adding this, like Watcher, at the API gate, carefully noting any changes as they come through. But what about updates that happen directly in the database, bypassing the API? Wouldn't those changes slip through the cracks?
That is one of the drawbacks with this method. It works best if most of your data changes are flowing through that API. But if you've got other processes modifying the database directly, you might miss those. Plus, setting up a system like Kafka can be complex.
So not a perfect solution. Finally, they talk about Snowflake change streams for CDC. This one sounds almost too easy. They really emphasize how simple it is to set up. You just write a simple SQL command to create a change stream on a table, and bam, you're capturing changes. So what's the catch?
Well, the catch is that Snowflake change streams don't necessarily capture every single change. They keep track of the latest state of a row, not every change that led up to that state. So if a value changes multiple times in a day, you might only see the final value at the end of the day.
So you lose that granular history of all the changes throughout the day. It's like seeing the destination, but not the journey.
Precisely. Whether or not that's a problem depends on what you need the data for. If you absolutely need that level of detail, Snowflake change streams might not be the way to go.
This is where things get really interesting. There's this comment on the article from Yaroslav Tkachenko, and let me tell you, he is not holding back. He basically says all 3 methods have serious flaws.
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches. He really emphasizes the performance concerns with database triggers, and he argues that doing dual writes with Kafka can lead to data inconsistencies. And he doesn't even consider Snowflake change streams to be true CDC for data integration.
So what does he recommend then? Where do we go from here?
Well, he suggests looking into tools that leverage what's called logical replication in databases like Postgres and MySQL, tools like Debezium, Flink CDC, and AWS DMS. These tools tap directly into the database's internal log, so they capture changes in real time without impacting performance.
Sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
Sadly, we're out of time for this part of the deep dive. But coming up in part 2, we'll unpack this concept of log-based CDC. We'll dive into how it works, why it's so powerful, and even look at some real-world examples of how companies are using it. So stay tuned for that.
Looking forward to it. All right, so picking up where we left off, we were just about to dive into Yaroslav's critique of those 3 CDC methods. And, well, he really didn't hold back.
Yeah, he called dual writes with Kafka an anti-pattern, which is pretty strong. He's definitely a fan of those log-based CDC tools that use logical replication. To be honest, that whole concept sounds a bit like magic to me.
I can see why. But it's actually pretty clever engineering. See, databases like Postgres and MySQL, they keep this super detailed log of all the changes. It's often called a write-ahead log or transaction log. And it's mainly used for database recovery, making sure that if there's a crash, nothing is lost.
Okay, so it's like a safety net for the database. But how do those log-based CDC tools actually tap into that?
Think of them as translators. They read that internal log, pull out all the relevant change data, and then convert it into a format that other systems can understand. And the beauty is, all of this happens outside of your main database, so there's very little impact on performance.
No, that's a huge plus, especially for those mission-critical applications where even a little bit of downtime is like a nightmare.
Exactly. And because it's all separate, you get a lot more flexibility and scalability. You can scale your CDC pipeline independently so you can handle huge volumes of change data without putting any extra stress on your database.
So you're telling me this method is complete, it's efficient, scalable, and it doesn't interfere with my production database? Come on, there's got to be a downside.
Now, nothing's ever truly perfect, right? It's not like you just plug it in and go. Setting up and managing those pipelines can get complex. You need to choose the right tools, configure everything properly, and make sure the other systems in your data flow can handle the influx of change data. It definitely requires some expertise.
Okay, so it's more like carefully plan and play than just plug and play. Got it. Now, Yaroslav really emphasized the work of this guy, Gunnar Morling. What makes him so special in the CDC world?
Gunnar is like the guy for CDC. He's super active in the Debezium project, gives amazing presentations, writes tons of insightful blog posts, you name it. He's a real thought leader.
Like the Yoda of change data capture, guiding us to data enlightenment.
Huh, I like that analogy. Yaroslav specifically mentioned a couple of Gunnar's presentations, one on CDC for microservices, super relevant these days with more and more companies moving to that architecture.
Yeah, keeping all those little services in sync must be a real headache.
Tell me about it. The other presentation dives into real-world use cases, like how companies are actually leveraging CDC to make better decisions. I think that's where it really clicks for a lot of people.
Real-world examples are always more powerful than just abstract concepts.
For sure. And there's also this fantastic presentation from Kafka Summit London 2024. It's like a whole overview of the entire CDC ecosystem. If you're trying to get a handle on all the different tools and approaches out there, that's the one to watch.
All right, so we've got microservices, real-world examples, and the broader ecosystem. Lots to explore. But let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the folks listening in right now. Why should they care about CDC? What does it actually mean for their work?
That's the key question. And honestly, whether you're a data analyst, a data scientist, a data engineer, even a business user, CDC can really transform how you work with the data. Think about it. Real-time insights, more accurate analysis, and a more agile data infrastructure. All of that is within reach.
Okay, those are some big promises. Can you give us some concrete examples, like how is CDC actually being used out in the real world?
Let's take data analytics, for example. Imagine you're working for an e-commerce company, and you're trying to understand customer behavior. Now, if you're relying on those daily snapshots, you're only getting a very limited view. You're missing all those little details, like how many times did a customer add an item to their cart before actually buying it, or how often did they abandon their cart altogether?
Ah, that's gold. Knowing those things is crucial for optimizing the customer experience.
Absolutely. With CDC, you capture all of that. Every click, every page view, every interaction. You can build this complete picture of their journey, pinpoint those pain points, and then, optimize. Increase conversions, boost customer loyalty, all that good stuff.
So it's like having this super powerful magnifying glass, letting you zoom in and analyze every single detail.
Precisely. No more guessing games. You have the data to make informed decisions. And for data scientists building machine learning models, this level of detail is a game changer.
I can see that. The more complete your data is, the better your models can learn and make predictions, right?
Exactly. Think about predicting customer churn. With CDC, you get their entire history, their purchases, their support tickets, their website activity, all of it. So your predictions are more accurate, and you can take proactive steps to keep those customers happy.
Wow. So CDC is like giving those models superpowers. They can see the whole picture, not just a tiny piece of it.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just for data science and analytics. CDC also has a huge impact on, data engineering as well. It simplifies data integration and makes it easier to build those data pipelines.
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Instead of having to build these complex batch processes to extract and load data from different sources, data engineers can use CDC to capture those changes in real time and stream them directly to their data warehouse or data lake.
So it's like having this constant stream of fresh data, always up to date. No more waiting for those nightly batch jobs to finish.
Exactly. And that means faster insights, more responsive analytics, and a more agile data infrastructure overall. Data engineers can focus on the things that really matter instead of getting bogged down in those tedious data tasks.
So it frees them up to work on the cool stuff. Now, so far, we've mostly talked about how CDC benefits folks in those technical roles. Yeah. What about, like, business users? Can they benefit from CDC as well?
Oh, absolutely. One of the great things about CDC is that it makes real-time insights accessible to everyone, not just the tech folks. Imagine you're a marketing manager launching a new campaign. With CDC, you can see how it's performing as it happens. How many people are engaging with your ads? How many are visiting your website? How many are making purchases? You get all of that data in real time.
That's a huge advantage over waiting for those weekly reports. You can actually adjust your strategy on the fly, based on real data, not just your gut feeling.
Exactly. It allows for much more agile decision-making. You see what's working, what's not, and you can tweak things to optimize your campaign for maximum impact.
It's like having this live dashboard showing you all the vital signs of your campaign.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just limited to marketing. Sales, customer support, even executives can get this real-time view of all their key performance indicators.
It's like having a finger on the pulse of the entire organization.
Exactly. CDC democratizes data access. It empowers everyone to make data-driven decisions.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from the technical nitty-gritty of different CDC methods to the real-world benefits for all sorts of roles. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. If CDC is becoming this prevalent, what does that mean for the future of data engineering and data analysis?
That's a great question to consider. As CDC becomes more mainstream, we're going to see a shift in the skills and tools that data professionals need to master. Data engineers are going to need to be comfortable with those CDC tools, and they'll need to know how to manage those real-time pipelines. And data analysts and scientists are going to need to adapt their techniques to take advantage of this granular, real-time data.
So it sounds like CDC isn't just a technological shift, it's a cultural shift. It's pushing organizations towards a more real-time, data-centric approach.
Absolutely. And as data continues to explode in volume and velocity, CDC is going to be key for any organization that wants to truly harness the power of their data and drive real value.
This has been a fascinating journey, but our deep dive isn't over yet. Stay tuned for the final part, where we'll explore some additional resources and things to keep in mind if you're thinking about implementing CDC in your own organization. Welcome back to our deep dive. We've covered a ton of ground, the different methods, the benefits, even that glimpse into the future of data. But let's get practical now. For our listeners out there, what should they keep in mind if they're thinking, hey, maybe we should try the CDC thing in our organization?
Well, for starters, remember those resources that Yaroslav pointed out. We'll make sure those presentations from Gunnar Morling, those articles, all of that will be linked in the show notes. Great place to start, especially for anyone wanting to understand more about log-based CDC.
Definitely check those out. And for those who want that broader view, that presentation from Kafka Summit London 2024 about the CDC ecosystem is super helpful. Lots of different tools and approaches out there. Good to get a sense of the landscape.
Now, beyond the resources, the biggest thing to remember is that with CDC, there's no magic bullet, right? No single answer for everyone. The best method, it really depends on your specific situation. How complex is your data? What are your technical resources like? What's your overall data strategy? Lots of factors to consider.
It's not just pick a tool, plug it in, and we're good to go. You really got to think it through. Like we talked about earlier, if you're working with a fairly simple database and you don't have a ton of resources, starting with database triggers might be a good move. But if you've got high volume, mission critical data, you might need to go with a more robust solution, like a log-based CDC tool, something like Debezium or Flink CDC.
Exactly. And it's not just about the technology, right? To really implement CDC successfully, you need buy-in from everyone involved. Developers, data engineers, analysts, business users, everyone. Everyone needs to be on board and understand how CDC can benefit them.
That human element is so important, and it's about embracing a new way of thinking, isn't it?
Mm.
Moving away from that batch-oriented mindset to a real-time data culture.
100%. It changes your processes, your workflows, even how people think about data in general. It's about embracing the power of data as it's happening, not just looking back at it later.
It's a powerful shift. It might sound daunting, but the potential benefits are enormous. Real-time insights, faster decisions, happier customers, all of that is within reach.
It really is. So for those of you out there starting your CDC journey, remember, do your research, pick the approach that makes sense for you, and don't be afraid to embrace that real-time data mindset.
Awesome advice. And most importantly, stay curious. The world of CDC is constantly changing. New tools are coming out, new techniques. Keep exploring, keep learning, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with data.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into changed data capture. Hope you found it valuable.
Happy data capturing, everyone.